Order, order. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. Our inquiry this morning continues to centre around the future of the water industry. We are delighted to be joined again by colleagues from the water industry itself. We first of all have a panel from Wessex Water. Good morning, you're very welcome to the committee. Thank you for making the time to join us. Can I ask you, for the benefit of those following our proceedings and indeed for our own official record, to introduce yourselves and explain your role in the company?
Absolutely, thank you. Good morning. My name is Ruth Jefferson and I'm the Chief Executive of Wessex Water, and I'm joined today by...
Good morning, everyone. My name's Andy Pymer. I'm Director of Finance.
Okay. Good morning. As you know, I think you're now the 8th of 9 water companies that we are going to be seeing in the course of this inquiry. So I have asked all others, and I will ask you the same question. If you would offer us insight, Ruth, into how you see the management of your organisation. What's important to you in terms of environmental performance, customer engagement, transparency, remuneration, those elements that you will be aware cause concern amongst your customers and the general public?
Absolutely, thank you. So you might know I'm relatively new into the role of Chief Executive. However, I have been with Wessex for a number of years. And I think the one thing that stands out for me is that we are absolutely about our people. We have about 2,500 employees. They're all local, or largely local. They're customers themselves, and they are there to do the right thing. And that sort of really does run through the organisation. Our people really care about getting things right. They really care about customers. And that means for us, we put customer service at sort of heart of everything we do. And I think that sort of is borne out in our performance. So, we do really well in the CMEX. We also have a very strong Trustpilot score. And we encourage our people to go the extra mile. So that ethos really does run through the business. The other thing that we are sort of acutely aware of, we work in a really beautiful part of England. The southwest has got a high number of SSSIs. We have 27% of the chalk streams in the country. So we're very aware that we need to make sure that our activities don't impact the environment, and they should be enhancing the environment where we can. So we are very keen and work really hard to work with others to make sure that we can bring the best. And we have an in-house team of very dedicated ecologists and environmentalists to make sure that we really are enhancing the environment. And it goes further than that. We even work in partnership with wildlife trusts and the RSPB, and have been behind a sort of a call for action, really, an alternative way in which we might have a regulatory model that would focus on catchments, and that's the SWAN initiative. So our commitment to the environment is really clear. We were also, I think it's important to talk about our ownership. We are owned by a single family business, a Malaysian business. They bought us in 2002, and when they bought Wessex Water, which was their first investment in the UK, their message was just be the best. So, and we have continued to try and make sure we are the best. It doesn't always go right, but we have that culture within the business where it doesn't go right. We hold our hands up, we try and fix it. But I think generally our performance is good. We are top of that sort of customer service. We do very well on drinking water quality and again in environmental performance. And we want to do that in an open and transparent way. And we hear the concerns about transparency. And we've led the way. In 2012, we were the first company to map our overflows that were operating in bathing waters. So again, everything we do, we want to be open and transparent. We don't always get it right, but we try to fix it where that happens.
Okay, look, can I just touch, since you've raised the question of your ownership there. Your predecessor was quite forthright on this. He described YTL as patient, long-term committed, and spoke out against short-term investors. Why the hell would you let someone who has a reputation for asset stripping, he said. And one can only imagine who you might be talking about there. But it's still a somewhat convoluted structure of ownership, isn't it? From the ultimate parent company to yourself, let alone then your own subsidiary downwards. Am I right in thinking that there are about 8 different layers of corporate governance? Can you talk me through that? Would that be easier for you?
I start, and then if we
want
to add, Andy will step in. We have a very simple and straightforward corporate structure. The Wessex Water Services business is ring-fenced, run as a standalone business. We have one subsidiary of Wessex Water Services, which is Wessex Water Services Finance PLC, and that exists purely to allow us to have access to the debt markets. You can't do that without that entity. And then we have a holding company in Wessex Water Limited. There is another holding company within the UK, which is YTL Utilities, which has other activities outside of the regulated water and services business. So, for example, YTL are investing in a new town in north of Bristol, Filton, and that Brabazon new town is held in a separate part of the group structure. So within the UK, it is very, very sort of simple and straightforward. There are holding companies outside of the UK because our parent company is in Malaysia. That's correct. And then ultimately, our ultimate owner is listed on the Malaysian Stock Exchange.
Yeah, I mean, I count 4 investment holding companies, investment holding and management company, and investment holding and provision of administration and technical support services in your family tree, so to speak. Does that really actually help the delivery of good quality water services?
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, the key focus in terms of delivery of water and environmental services and customer service is very much within the ring-fenced entity within the UK. So Wessex Water Services Limited is that regulated entity. As Ruth said, there's one single company as a full subsidiary of that is a PLC that's needed to raise debt on the debt markets. And then Wessex Water Services has got a single parent, Wessex Water Limited. Within the Wessex Water Limited company, that just has other companies. For example, there's a joint billing company that we have with Bristol Water, so we jointly bill customers in the Bristol Water region who are supplied for water by Bristol Water and with wastewater by ourselves. So better customer service would be to have a single bill and a single point of contact. So you've got a joint billing company at the Wessex Water Limited level, and then the ultimate holding company within or parent company within the UK is the YTL Utilities UK Limited, and as Ruth said, that includes a construction business, for example, totally separate from the water business, but that reflects YTL's other sort of business interests within the UK and the other investment and inward investment and sort of growth and jobs that it's making into the UK economy.
Okay, you are classed as being a company in elevated concern. Your gearing is around 70% at the moment. Ofwat's target for companies is 55%. Now, you're by no means unusual in the sector, but talk me through this relationship between yourself and Ofwat and how everybody seems quite happy to say your target is 55%, but it doesn't really matter, does it?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. So it does absolutely matter in terms of sort of level of gearing, and we've seen that in sort of examples in the industry in terms of sort of resilience. I think the first thing I'd say is that Ofwat doesn't set a target of 55%. Ofwat, when it sets price control, has to have a notional company that's chosen 55% in previous.
As a finance professional in the sector, are Ofwat wrong with this 55%?
No. So Ofwat have to identify a notional company when
we
they
know
set the
about
price,
the notional company,
and
your
that's
number
55%.
But are they wrong?
So then further on in the document where Ofwat sets out the 55% for the notional company, a couple of pages later it then refers to its view on financial resilience, and it says it remains its view that gearing above 70% is not or may not be consistent with long-term sustainability, financial sustainability. Ofwat's also got a metric in place or a mechanism in place in this 5 years where if companies are geared above 70%, they have to share some of that with customers. So I'd say, if anything, Ofwat's got a target of 70%, not 55%. But so Ofwat uses different percentage gearing figures in different places for different purposes. But
nevertheless, you are in the elevated concern category. You have been overspending your expenditure allowances. So how are you going to ensure that you've got financial stability in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the financial resilience, I guess stepping back, one has to ask the question, what is the appropriate level of gearing? And the opposite of gearing, so gearing is the debt, which is currently just at around 70%, 69% in our case this year. The flip side of debt is the equity, so that means in our case we've got an equity buffer of 31% in the business, and to put that into context, that equity buffer equals 2 years of revenues from customers. And this is actually a decision that we took on acquisition by YTL 20 years ago. What would be an appropriate level of equity buffer to have within the business? 2 years of customer funding, 2 years of bills and income is a good level of financial resilience in our view. Obviously, other companies take different views. If you were good at 55%, it would be 3-year equity buffer. If you were 85%, it would be a 1-year equity buffer. I think certainly our view would be a year would be too short, and so 85% isn't appropriate. As I say, 2 years is. So we've got a 2-year equity buffer in our sort of current 69% gearing, so 69 is a good position to be in. It reflects a good equity buffer for the business. Okay,
now can I take you to your PR24 business plan? Offered do you think something 17% less than you'd asked for? You're now appealing that through the CMA process. Talk me through your thinking in the appeal, and what are you going to do if your appeal doesn't succeed?
You're right. Across the sector, we had the largest sort of reduction in allowances. We put forward a very ambitious plan. It was about just over £5 billion, and the final determination came in at just over £4 billion. So we have a gap in funding, and our decision to go to the board, which was not a decision we took lightly. We've never appealed a final determination before. But on this occasion, we have concluded that we just don't have sufficient allowances to do everything that we need to do over the next 5-year period. And particularly in a couple of areas. One is around our water supply base costs, and then around our enhancement spend. So we have a very large programme of phosphorus removal to do over the next 5 years. We need to make improvements at 123 sites. And the allowances that we have received as part of that final determination, we don't feel that we can make all of those investments. So we will ask the CMA to look again at the final determination for us. Sorry, in the second part of the question. And if we don't get it, we're confident that we've got a good position in front of the CMA. You can't reasonably expect to get everything, but we, as we've talked about, we have a long-term owner who will do everything necessary to make sure that we can deliver what we have said we were going to deliver over the next 5-year period. So we are confident that we will be able to do that.
Can I then, look, as I say, you're the 8th company that we've spoken to. I might be wrong about this, but I think you're the first that's come before us saying that you're not paying dividends for the next 5 years. Talk us through that decision, which would be somewhat counterintuitive within the sector, I think.
Shall I start with a high level, and Andy might come in with the detail? Yes, our business plan was based on the fact that there would need to be some equity as part of that plan, and the decision of our shareholders is that the assumption will be over the next 5-year period they will not take dividend, which equates to about £500 million over the next 5-year period. So if we assume that we get the allowances we need from the CMA and from the Ofwat's final determination, and with that position on the dividend, that then we will be able to deliver everything that we need to do over the next 5-year period. That said, if we don't receive everything at the CMA, our investors stand ready to do whatever is necessary to make sure that we're able to deliver our functions. And did you want to add any detail?
Maybe just to add to that, I mean, it's very much an interesting sort of inflection point at this sort of point in the history of the water industry. We are now sort of ramping up to a sort of significant investment programme, and that was the logic for sort of privatised model in the first place, to be able to attract private investment, and that's now required to deliver the programme going forward. And in terms of sort of equity support, at that point I was making earlier about maintaining those sort of 2 years of equity buffer. So to maintain that sort of 30% equity buffer, it requires YTL to keep the current sort of or proposed dividends within the business in order to keep the equity in the business to reinvest in the assets and the improvements that are needed.
So in some cases, actually, this does prove it's a proof point for what your former chief executive said about YTL as an owner.
Yes, very much. Yes, in terms of,
absolutely.
Long-term
you've also not been paying bonuses to your executives recently.
We haven't been paying.
Certainly for the chief executive.
Sorry, I missed that. That's right, last year.
Yes.
Yes.
So where will you have to get to before you turn that tap back on?
Well, any decision to pay a bonus is, as you've heard, from independent remuneration committees, and we have 12 measures that we have within that decision-making process, and only if 9 out of those 12 are met would a decision to pay a bonus even be on the table. So, as you said, last year, the Remuneration Committee felt that given we had 2 prosecutions from 2018 incidents that it wasn't appropriate to pay a bonus to the chief executive. In previous periods, just to sort of to expand on that, where we have not met our environmental performance targets, so where we were a 2-star company, which we were not happy about, there were no bonuses paid for the environmental element. Now, where we had performed well in other elements, there may have been some bonus paid, but certainly our independent remuneration committee does apply that sort of balance
link
measure.
Environmental performance
Absolutely.
to performance payments.
Absolutely, and equally they would link customer service metrics. So, for example, one of the metrics that we had previously was around the number of customers that we had on affordability programmes, our TAP programme. So again, we have very clear targets that we have to meet. If we don't meet them, we don't pay bonuses.
Okay, thank you very much. Sarah, we've got some questions on environmental performance that you're going to lead on.
Chair, if I may just come in on the back of that. If the business doesn't become more financially stable in the future, what assessment have you made on the impact to your consumers? Particularly, obviously, I'm interested in those in Glastonbury and Somerton in my constituency.
Certainly, I mean, on that, so the business currently has operating at the 70% gearing with 30% equity buffer. We've been operating at that level for the last 22 years. Ofwat, in fact, maybe to the Chair's earlier comment about the elevated concern, Ofwat had 2 issues for putting us into elevated concern this year. One of those, neither of which was anything to do with the gearing. One of them was our interest cover ratios, which with the high inflation that we've had ourselves along with the sector as a whole, have seen a deterioration in those, but we've now turned the corner on that. The second reason for elevated concern was our inadequate business plan rating, which at the draft determination, at the final determination, that's now been removed by Ofwat. So in a way, the 2 issues that Ofwat had highlighted as issues are things, one of which is completely solved, the other's well on its way to being solved. So I think it's right that we look and ensure that we take action to preserve the sort of financial resilience of the business. We believe the current sort of gearing level does exactly that, but we always keep that under review. And I guess interest of customers and the ability to deliver for customers in the environment is sort of paramount in saying, do we have the financial firepower, as it were, to be able to do that?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So moving on to environmental performance, Wessex has seen increasing levels of pollution, or numbers of pollution incidents over the last couple of years, and data shows that you're overusing some of these sewage overflows. What explains this increase and that 4-star rating from the Environment Agency? And does that seem appropriate in the context of the number of spills?
I entirely understand why you're asking that question. Last year we had 126 total pollutions. That's too many. But according to the EA's approach, the EPA, that did mean that overall we were a 4-star company because we didn't have many serious pollutions and we were green in some of the other metrics that they track. Pollution incident reduction is absolutely key to us, and that takes many different forms. So part of our approach is to use more technology, try to understand the network, spot issues before they happen. So we were the first company to introduce Storm Harvester, which I think others have talked to you about as well, which is the ability to have eyes on the network, make sure that we get to issues before they become serious pollution incidents. And over the next 5 years, we'll put another 10,000 sewer monitors into the network. And I think what we're seeing in the wastewater side of the business is equivalent to the telemetry and the monitoring that we already have in the water supply. But we need to step it up, we need to roll more out, and we need to be getting back good information so that we can make those sort of proactive interventions as opposed to reactive, which is obviously when it might have gone wrong. In relation to the spills, you're right, our spill numbers are high, but I talked earlier about the beautiful area in which we work. That beautiful area has a lot of chalk. Our geology means that we have a lot of groundwater, and when those groundwater levels are high, our network does become inundated with groundwater. Now, that said, we still need to make sure that we are doing infiltration sealing, keeping it out of the network. There's only 27% of the network that is within our ownership and control, but yes, absolutely, we need to make sure that we're sealing it, and the rest of the network is in private hands, and at the moment we don't have the powers to make those interventions in that side of the network. However, we will continue to do more infiltration sealing. The groundwater induced overflows, the top 10 of our sort of frequently spilling overflows are all impacted by groundwater. So what we're doing is sort of something a bit more sort of alternative, nature-based, which is exactly where we want to be. So, for example, at Shrewton, which is our second most frequently spilling overflow, and I'm saying it's not just spilling for days, it's weeks, it's months of the year because of those groundwater levels. That's not acceptable. What we have done is we put a nature-based solution on the end of that overflow. That nature-based solution is actually treating that groundwater, and it's actually achieving E. coli removal levels that we see where we use UV disinfection on our water supply. So it really does work. It's improving the bathing water quality. And at Hanging Langford, another example where we've worked with the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust, a great example of where we can do things together because we're all caring about the water quality. Another reed bed is having huge, the parameters that we are seeing and the sample results that we are seeing are showing that they are reducing not only sort of the standard things you'd expect, BOD, but also the E. coli. And actually, with that example at Hanging Langford, the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust have now got a nature reserve that is starting to attract rare birds, the water rail, the reed warblers. So there are multiple benefits of some of these interventions. So we do have a lot to do on storm overflows. We don't sit here taking it lightly. There's about £500 million worth of improvements over the next 5 years. At the moment, we're spending about £3 million a month. We'll spend around £7 million a month over the next 5-year period. And it'll be a combination of different things, nature-based, storage, rainwater separation, keeping out of the foul network the rainwater that is currently inundating it. But yeah, we are alive to the challenges.
Yeah, great. I'm really pleased to hear that you're taking that a more nature-based solution approach. I think you've got 36 nature-based solutions across the patch, which is fantastic. I'd love to come out and see some of them. But you've said that the regulators are not sufficiently supportive of your ambitions to invest in more nature-based solutions to treat overflows. Why is that?
At the moment, the regulatory framework is not set up to allow these things at scale. We have, you're right, Sarah, 36 trials. They are going to be considered trials over the next 5-year period. And they will cost us around £100 million, but it's the right thing to do. We are keen that we put these nature-based solutions in, that we get the evidence to show that they work, and then we are hopeful that there will be the opportunity to do this at scale. And I think probably some of the work of the Cunliffe Commission is that opportunity. There are catchment-based approaches, and we have been a big proponent of an alternative catchment-based approach to regulation.
Thank you. Recently, you've upgraded 5 sewage works along the River Parrett, running through my constituency. I was able to visit the Langport sewage works last summer. Some of the works upgrades were being installed. Now, I understand from a local citizen scientist, Dr. Andrew Clegg, that the water quality monitoring he's been carrying out is showing some minor improvements, which is fantastic near the sewage outfalls just a little bit further down the stream. Earlier this week, on Monday, I met with a group from Langport Town Council and the Cockermore Community Trust, who with me are pushing for the River Parrett to the Langport to receive the designated bathing water status that it deserves. So many people use the water, they're either in it or on it along that stretch. So we were joined by members of the Wessex Water Community Outreach Team who were absolutely fantastic, all credit to them. And it was really encouraging to hear more about some of the monitoring AI technology that you're using to check the water is safe, and there's an app that goes alongside it. But given that this waterway is regularly used recreationally, what further steps are you taking to ensure that the water is healthy for this site, but also others like it?
So you're right, we have done some improvements at the Langport Works to reduce the phosphates that are entering the river. The Tone and Parrett is a really good example of where you can do catchment-based approaches. We have worked with around 100 farmers. We need to remove 2.5 tonnes of phosphorus, so working with those farmers by planting cover crops, 1,300 hectares, I believe, of cover crops have been planted, which are contributing to removing those phosphorus levels. We also have fenced watercourses with the farmers. Again, this is an example of where you can do things differently and improve water quality in a holistic way. To your point around bathing waters, we really hear that our customers and communities want to enjoy water. So what we have been doing, and you talk about AI, is we have been doing some real water quality monitoring, producing apps that are then available to those who want to enjoy our rivers to make an informed decision about whether or not they swim. And that AI is really promising. It actually is sort of about 95% as accurate as lab samples. So again, we are working with communities. We have within our patch 3 designating bathing waters at the moment, including the world's, I think it's the oldest, isn't it, open water swimming club at Farley Hungerford, which is not far from where we are based. And we are really keen to support these groups, and we are rolling out those apps where we can. And Sarah, we will pick up with your constituents and make sure that we include them in that work.
Thank you very much. Despite this, the Glastonbury Water Recycling Centre spilled 94 times, polluting the Glastonbury Mill Stream and the River Brue for 1,267 hours. Last year, what kind of sewage monitoring system is being used at this site, and how can we stop this level of spills happening?
So all of our works and all our overflows are now fully monitored, and we make that information available on maps, and I think that's probably common. You'll have heard that from other companies, but that's live data. As I talked about earlier, we need to reduce these spills, so our sort of pollution incident reduction approach is a combination of technologies, so things like Storm Harvester and AI. It's a combination of investment at our works, so we need to make sure we're maintaining our assets. It's also about working with our customers and communities, so sort of some working, one of the biggest causes of pollution is blockages, so we have got work to do with our customers around not misusing our sewers. But I think it is a combination of efforts and a combination of interventions, and one of the things we're really pleased about is we have a Water Guardian programme where we have sort of 200 local individuals who help us keep eyes on those rivers, spot issues as they come along, and it's multiple interventions, Sarah. At Glastonbury we have work to do. We need to work together on these issues.
Yeah. Back in 24, the BBC identified that 68 sites where sewage may have been discharged illegally in the Wessex region. Back in 2022, it found that Wessex had spilled for over 1,500 hours, some of which was on the 19th of July in 2022, which you'll remember was the hottest day on record. How is that allowed to happen?
There's a distinction, I think, between dry day spills, which shouldn't be happening, and we have every effort to make sure that those spills are not taking place. The example of the BBC cited, and we proactively provided the information that the BBC sought, is groundwater again. So those are the sites that I referred to earlier, like the Shrewtons, where because of those high groundwater levels, the sewers are inundated and they are operating outside of extreme weather conditions. So we will focus, as I say, on these nature-based solutions to make sure that because they are discharging for long periods, they are treated.
And then in 24, the advertising agency banned Wessex Water from releasing a TV advert about its plan to tackle storm overflows, as it was misleading, and admitted the information about your overflow and environmental record. What does this tell us about your approach to transparency and investment?
Right, the TV advert we did take down following the advertising agency's approach. I think we did not include the information that they would have expected. It was around our historic environmental performance, and we reflect on that, and we would make sure that if we did introduce another TV advert, we were meeting all of those requirements.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to probe a bit further, Ruth, on the issue around the TV advert, because obviously the Advertising Standards Agency said that advert needed to come down. It was misleading to the consumer. It confused the progress you had made. It implied you'd made a lot more progress than you had made on tackling sewage. How much money did the TV advert cost the company?
I don't have that figure with me, Helena, but I can certainly provide that to you. I mean, there would have been a cost associated with the advert. I appreciate that.
Roughly, what would that be? What would the marketing budget be every year?
I wouldn't want to mislead you, Helena. I will certainly follow up, but I can't imagine it was a significant amount of money. We do a lot of our work in-house in many areas, but I will certainly follow up. I think the issue with the advert itself was around our environmental performance and the fact we were a 2-star company. And at the time that the advert was aired, we hadn't been confirmed as a 4-star company, and that was an issue that the Advertising Standards Agency raised with us.
I think there were other issues as well. I think they thought it was confusing to imply that you were operating on 21st century practices when actually there are still issues with wastewater and rainwater being combined and going out together. I think that was the issue the ASA was getting at. I mean, I just think we need to get to the root of this, because water companies exist to provide clean water. And I think customers would find it quite concerning that on the one hand you're saying to us, we're not sure we're going to have the right level of investment to invest in all the assets that we need to repair. But on the other hand, we're spending money on TV adverts that are found to be misleading. Would that money not be better spent on just fixing the pipes?
I understand why you asked the question. I think the clean water element, we're very good in the clean water space. You know, we are considered a top performer. The advert itself is part of our package of engagement with our customers. We do feel that we need to get some messages to customers, and we took a decision to do that by way of TV advert on that occasion. We do other things. We have a customer magazine, we have radio adverts, etc. I think it was a small fraction of a budget. I entirely appreciate that we need to invest. We have a programme of work over the next 5 years to do that. I think we are in a process with the CMA. We were seeking additional funding to make sure we can do everything that we need to do, but we are confident that we will make the improvements that are required.
How much does the magazine cost?
Oh, we'll get Andy.
So the magazine, so it works out about sort of 13 pence per customer. It's about £200,000 per year, yes. Yeah.
And I think the point about, as Sarah said, you know, on the hottest day of the year, 19th of July 2022, there were 68 sites where sewage have been discharged illegally because wastewater and rainwater were being combined on clearly a day when there wasn't any rain. So that's the misleading nature of what the advert that the ASA banned, because they were saying you're implying you're not doing that anymore, but actually you are. So I think that's where the root of the problem is. And I just think money should be spent very carefully given the scale of the problem in the water industry.
I agree.
Okay. Right, we have some questions now around the subject of water security. Jane, do you want to lead on this?
Yes. Thank you for coming. Nice to meet you. My question is about water security. So your water resources management plan said that your area was classified as seriously water stressed, and there was a drought, I understand, in 2022. How resilient have you been to drought over the past few years? And do you see that as a large risk in the future?
So we have been very resilient to drought. We haven't had to put any sort of temporary use bans, or traditionally as they were called hosepipe bans, since 1976. So we have a resilient position, which is helped by the fact in AMP6 we spent £230 million putting in a grid which allows us to move water across the network. That really does help. So it means that where we have got areas of stress, we can make sure that we have resilient supplies. Over the next 5-year period, in partnership with Pennon and South West Water, we have 2 or 3 strategic resource programmes, one of which is a second reservoir at Cheddar, which will again have resilience for the north of the patch and for the South West Water area, and also another reservoir in a quarry that's currently an active quarry, but by in the 2040s will no longer be mined and will be able to use as an alternative source as well.
That's quite a long time away, though, isn't it? How long do you think it will be before those 2 reservoirs are online, and will they definitely become online?
Cheddar 2 will be online early 2030s, 2032. Spades will be in the ground in the next couple of years, and then Mendip Quarry will follow after that. So these are the sort of the longer term plans, and you're absolutely right. We need to be resilient for the future. We need to be able to invest for the future to make sure that we've got the water resources that we require.
So in the 7 years in between, you seem to be your leakage figures aren't as high as they could be. Your leakage reduction figures aren't as high as they could be. And you do seem to be relying somewhat on mandatory water efficiency labelling, kind of other government-led reforms to reach your targets. Do you think that's realistic? Do you think you are resilient enough as a company with your leakage targets? Do you think you will meet them? Or is this reliance on government targets realistic? So
our leakage performance has been very good historically. you're right, there are a number of ways in which you can address the issues of water scarcity. Some is around leakage, some is around consumption and behaviours, so we'll work with our customers in that respect as well. On the leakage side, we will roll out more loggers over the next 5-year period to make sure that we're spotting and fixing these leaks. And again, part of our sort of in-house approach, we've got teams that are 24/7 looking for leaks and fixing them where we find them. In terms of, where am I going? Per capita consumption, water consumption, well, one of the key things over the next 5 years is a smart metering programme that we'll roll out. Yeah. And we've deliberately targeted that smart metering programme, which will be around 200,000, if not more, smart meters in the Hampshire Avon, which is a chalk stream, a precious chalk stream, and therefore we need to make sure that we're reducing those abstraction levels and that we are monitoring usage as well. So there are definitely different strategies. We're not just relying on a government approach. We have things that we need to do as well, both on leakage and on consumption.
You're looking at the smart meters to be 40% coverage by 2030, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, so one more question. I'm afraid I don't know your area very well. I'm South West Water. I was going to ask how many reservoirs you do have.
Andy.
So we've got, in fact, our largest reservoir is jointly owned with South West Water, so that's the Wimblewall Reservoir, and that's about a third of our capacity, and then we would have around a dozen other reservoirs that would be the company's reservoirs, chiefly in the west of the region. So we're about 25% surface water, and that's in the western part of our region, and 75% groundwater, so boreholes and so on, which would be on the north and the east of our region.
I suppose my concern is because you are aware that you're a seriously water-stressed area, how come no investment in reservoirs has been made before and that we're looking at the first one coming online in 2032? How come you didn't invest in building reservoirs previously?
It's a mix of, so there's a whole range of different sort of investments that one would make to ensure water security. So the grid, which Ruth mentioned, for sort of £230 million, there has been sort of a significant investment, and that provided actually additional resilience. That was also used during some of the adverse storms. We had sort of red weather warnings within a few weeks of it being turned on, in fact, and we were able to keep properties in supply. So actually that sort of is resilient both to drought and also to other extremes of weather.
But in total,
yes, correct. So in total, one sort of says, in fact, the way it actually works is that one comes up with a whole range of different options. There are reservoirs, there's smart metering, there's the grid, etc. One then works out which of those is the most cost effective, and it's a sort of full process that actually the industry as a whole does together with the regulators, and you pick off the most efficient and effective options.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to some questions around asset health, high impact incidents and customer satisfaction. Henry, can I ask you to lead the question here?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about replacement rates. So the committee's heard from from Ofwat that the current replacing rate is around 0.1%, and there was acceptance that that's not fast enough. And I think told the committee that the right rate would be something between 0.8 and 1%. And I think at the moment, in terms of the price review, it's sort of 0.4%. It was interesting that Severn Trent, when they presented evidence, said that the replacement rate should be reflected the same as the railways. What's your replacement rate?
0.4%.
0.4%.
But I think
for the next 5 years,
for the next 5 year period,
0.25 currently.
Yeah. So we will increase our rate of replacement over the next 5 years, because to your point, at the moment the current levels of investment assumes that some of our water mains will last 400 years. We know that's not the case, so we need to make sure that we're increasing those levels. And on the wastewater side, the current rates of investment assume our sewage network lasts 800 years. Again, that's not the case. So we understand and accept that we need to increase our levels of investment, and over the next 5 years it will be 0.4% mains replacement rate.
Can you comment on in respect of the 0.8%, 1%, or what that was pointed out by Severn Trent in respect of the replacement rate being at the railway, sort of as a comment on the industry as a whole, how you view that replacement rate?
Certainly. Ultimately, I guess when you reach steady state, the question is how long do these pipes last? And it's a very wide range in terms of sort of how long sewers can last. So in fact, actually, we're based in Bath. The great sewer in Bath that was built by the Romans literally 2,000 years ago is actually still there and operating. But clearly, there are other sewers that have been built more recently from fibre pitch tar, for example, that actually don't have anywhere near that sort of lifetime. But I think if you say a sort of 0.8 to 1% period, that would be a sort of 100 to 120 years, which I think is a reasonable average life for sort of underground infrastructure. Actually, interestingly, in the accounting standards, I think the assumption is 108 years. So that would seem to be a fairly reasonable long run rate. And I guess the challenge is to get from where we are today to that long run rate. It doesn't have to all be done overnight, but certainly you'd expect over time for there to be a gradual increase to that sort of level.
That's helpful, thank you. Can I also ask about the enhancement expenditure, because I think you've underspent your enhancement expenditure, so the investment in infrastructure to improve services by 16%. Can you, and you obviously gave evidence earlier that you're appealing in respect of on that rate. Why is that, and what impact is that having?
Yeah, so there's sort of two reasons for that. So partly it was a slower start at the beginning of the period, so particularly with COVID and other issues, we spent less at the beginning than we would otherwise have done. So we're sort of slightly behind, but we are certainly sort of catching that up. So in this year we're spending £439 million in total on our sort of capital investment. So a very sort of significant amount of increase. We also are spending more than the maintenance allowance, and historically we have done that for the last 20 years. But I think the second point, interestingly, is that the regulatory regime itself is set up as an incentive-based regime with the intention of companies meeting the requirements in terms of the outcomes and the outputs. And then if there are efficiencies against that, then that's actually encouraged by the regulatory regime, and half of those savings are then shared with customers. But I think the situation that we've got ourselves into is that the actual measurement in terms of what's being delivered for the money that's being spent, new issues such as storm overflows have come along, which actually weren't a part of the measurement process sort of 5 years ago, and they absolutely do need to be a part of the measurement process. So it's a mixture of both of those things. I think in our own case, actually in total for the price review, we will, for this 5-year period, we will overspend the total allowance that we've been given.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about major incidents that have occurred in your area. And there was a particular incident, I believe, in May 2023 in Wiltshire, where you were fined £300,000 for supplying water that wasn't fit for human consumption. And that went on for 3 weeks. And before that happened, customers were complaining for weeks about a funny taste in the water. And do you accept that the water company perhaps didn't react soon enough to those complaints and listen to the customers about the change they were seeing?
Firstly, that incident shouldn't have happened. And we did receive complaints about taste. And as you say, it went on to be prosecuted by the DWI, and we cooperated with that because it was an incident that could have been prevented. Ultimately, a combination of factors, but it was a failure of our processes at our works. We were doing some maintenance work. We work with activated carbon. We were replacing some of that. We didn't have sufficient processes in place, and we put water into supply that we shouldn't have put into supply. So from that perspective, it shouldn't have happened, and we've learnt from that, because we were talking earlier about the grid, and we were talking earlier about different water sources, groundwater and also surface water sources. We've learnt that sometimes as we use our grid or we rezone, customers are really sensitive to the taste of their water, and we can often see increased contact around those activities. So we are really proactively, where we are making those tweaks to the network, we are contacting our customers in advance and making sure that they're aware. But that incident should not have happened.
Making customers aware of a change that is harmless and is not an issue with the drinking water is one thing, which I think is what you're talking about there. But what are the controls now in place so that when people phone up your helpline to say, my water suddenly got a funny taste, or appreciate this was not in your area, but we have heard from obviously South West Water about the very serious parasite outbreak in Devon, where people were phoning up and saying they're getting sick and it wasn't acted on soon enough. What mechanisms do you have in place to make sure that your customer service teams properly escalate that so that people aren't drinking unsafe water for 3 weeks?
We actively investigate every customer contact about drinking water quality. That is our way now of making sure that we're taking each of those contacts very seriously. And we refer that to our own internal teams who look at water quality, and they will make a judgment call based on the information we receive. Do we need to go and visit the customer? Do we need to go and sample at the tap? Do we need to do further work? So we do investigate those water quality contacts.
You're confident an incident like this can't happen again?
What I am confident now is that we put every effort to make sure that those contacts are taken seriously.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of our questioning for this morning. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your engagement. We have one other panel to take evidence from. We'll then consider our next steps after that. I think you may anticipate hearing a bit further from us, but thank you for your attendance today. There are a couple of points that I will follow up with you in correspondence, and we will hopefully be able to resolve it at that. So thank you for your attendance today. I'm not going to suspend. I will just, if you can perhaps remove yourself, we'll bring in the next witness.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a very weird process. Literally, I had to.
Yes. Yeah.
10-minute move.
I was going to see why my 91-year-old mother-in-law is very keen to that you're Right. Andrew, mics are still live, we're still broadcasting.
I'm not saying anything inappropriate.
Yeah.
Oh, I take my jacket.
If you wish, yes, I'm supremely relaxed about these things.
Ready for
I
action.
wouldn't necessarily rely on that being the case in every select committee or but I'm a Liberal, it's not for me to tell people what to wear. Right. Well, good morning, Mark. Welcome to the committee. Again, as previously, can I invite you just to introduce yourself for the benefit of the official record?
Yeah, good morning. Mark Thurston, Chief Executive at Anglian Water. It's a job I've had now I've been in the company 9 months, 8 months in post, so I'm sort of new to the business. I'm new to the sector. I've sort of worked on the fringes of the water sector before, but this is my first time sort of being in the water sector, and I'm new to the region as well. I'm not from east of England, so I'm sort of learning as I'm doing on sort of three fronts. My background really is in capital delivery, and that's where I've spent the last 20, 25 years of my career, and that's part of why I think the board hired me, because we've got a big investment programme coming towards us in the next 10, 15 years at Anglian, and that's been a lot of my focus since I've arrived in the business.
You came to Anglian from being Chief Executive of HS2?
I was Chief Executive at HS2 for 6.5 years, yeah.
So you just pursue the quiet life in your professional life?
Yeah, friends and family said to me, really, when I said I was joining a water company, but no, it's I'm sure we'll get into some of what I've learned and observed. I guess I know you've interviewed many of my peers for your committee hearings. I probably bring a slightly different, fresher view. I'm the sort of new kid amongst the group. And
your background is as an engineer?
I'm an engineer, chartered electrical engineer, yeah.
Right, okay. Mark, you'll have heard the questions I asked of the previous panel, so just to give you the same opportunity to outline the sort of business that you want to run at Anglian Water. What's your views on customer engagement, environmental performance, transparency, the values of the company, if you like?
Yeah, and that's a good place to start, because in taking a break between my last job and my new job, joining a sort of very purpose, values-led business was important for me. What I knew of the water sector was that Anglian had quite a strong reputation for. It's a very purpose-led organisation. The purpose of the company is enshrined in the articles of the organisation, so it's something the board take very seriously. It's something that's been in place now for some 5 years. I've been impressed, actually, coming into the company, listening to Ruth, interestingly. We've got 6,000 employees. They all work, they all live in the region. They're all customers, the majority of them. And they're deeply invested in the region, actually, as customers and for customers. So, there's lots of things we need to be better at. I'm sure we're going to expose some of those in the next hour or so. But it was part of my decision to join the organisation alongside the challenges of what we've got to deliver. Because certainly the investment that we'll make in the next 10, 15 years is going to have a profound effect on the economy of the region. The purpose talks about the organisation being focused on the social, environmental and economic prosperity of the region, and we are a big employer, and I think there's a lot more opportunity for Anglian to sort of contribute to the wider region. So that would be my early impressions, and the board take the purpose very seriously. I see that in the management level in the time I've been with the business, and we've had, certainly coming through the winter, although a lot of my time has been focused on the price review since I've been with the business. We've had our fair share of incidents over the winter, and seeing how staff respond in real time through night and day, making sure we sort of maintain customer supply and customer service, it's been really impressive to see. And many of the employees have been with the company their whole careers. They've sort of been from school into technicians. Our graduate program and apprenticeship program have been very successful. So that sort of sense of ownership of what the business stands for is quite palpable actually in Anglian, and I think that's credit to my predecessor who'd been in the business a long time. It's got a very sort of family culture, and I think that's a good starting position for me to come in and sort of move the business forward.
Look, we are constrained for time, and I don't want anybody to go away feeling that they've not had the opportunity to put their case and tell their story. But if we can maybe just focus on keeping questions and answers quite tight. So we're going to start with some questions around ownership, financial performance and returns. And Andrew, can I ask you to lead this section, please?
Yeah, look, nice to have you here, Mark. We've met previously, and I know I think there's a real sense of purpose that comes through from the frontline staff I've met at Anglian, either locally or more closely in the region. I've got a couple of questions about bigger structure stuff, because I think sometimes there's a dissonance between the frontline staff we meet as members of Parliament and some of the corporate structures behind the company. I think through this inquiry we're really looking to understand some of that. So my first question is really around some of this stuff the committee's been looking at, where I think the phrase is you've been described as having an opaque corporate structure. And we're really interested to understand how that, that criticism of your structure, and I think it's been evidenced to previous committees that sometimes that structure allows you to sustain a higher level of debt without damaging some of your debt levels. So can you talk us through the structure of the company and whether that meets the definition of that family feeling that you've described about the operation?
Yeah, and when I talk about the family feeling, that's very much in the water business, the regulated business. I think to the point, I know this has come up in some of the other committees, and we're very live to this at Anglian. If you think this is a company that's been around now for 35 years, it was a PLC listed business when it first came out of privatisation. It went into private ownership in 2006, I think, was it when it first started. So you've got a sort of history of companies that are in that structure you refer to. But fundamentally, our business is very similar to Yorkshire's. Actually, I saw the Yorkshire committee, the CFO, I thought did a good job explaining the three tiers. So the holding companies where the shareholders sit. We have a midco, which is really where we draw the debt into the business, where we draw the finances into the business to fund the business, and then we've got the operating company, the regulated business, where where the employees sit, and fundamentally that's the sort of three tiers. Now, that's been very effective. It's not unusual for regulated businesses to look like that. It's certainly the best way to draw cost-effective finance into the organisation to drive that cost into for customer value for money. But we recognise, to your point around sort of the, language like opaqueness and transparency, that's something we're going to have to address. And my expectation is, and those conversations have started at the board with the shareholders, my expectation is that we will address that and simplify that as we go through AMP8. Actually, I think the structure will look, there are some of the entities in there that we're naturally closing down anyway for legal reasons. They're just legacy companies of the history of the last 35 years. But I think we will naturally simplify that structure over the next, over AMP8.
Good. So if we invite you back next year, do you think you'll be able to say it's a simpler structure we'd understand, or is it a longer term ambition to simplify?
I think in a year's time, I think we'd have more clarity about what the structure would look like. I think it's going to take some time to get there because, amongst other things, we've got to put more equity into the business. We're well within our sort of acceptable gearing ratios. But again, we want to improve those for the reasons that your question talks to. And certainly in a year, I think I would be able to be more specific about what that final structure would look like as we sort of commit to simplifying that over the life of the next 5 years.
But as a CEO, do you understand the frustration many customers, business, farmers and domestic customers feel between responsiveness of what they see as the logo of Anglian Water and then these big opaque structures and how the two don't seem to join together?
Yeah, I've candidly, in my 8 months, I've had to get my head around this myself, and there's a lot of history there, and there's a lot of detail, which I'd be very happy actually to share with the committee in detail, because we could consume the time, to the chair's point, on this subject issue. And that's, I think, to your point, we understand the issue. We want to simplify it. It needs to make sure that there's no sort of suspicion of opaqueness there. That's not the intent. Certainly the board and the shareholders are very alive to that. And as I say, we will look to change that in time.
Can I follow up with a question? I think we asked this. We've asked this to several companies, which is around the business plan suggests you retain this gearing level close to 70%. When Ofwat is recommending this gearing level of 55%. Yes, we did have this we have this yesterday and in this previous session. Can you give us in your words, though, whether you think that's a sustainable approach, and just to explain your credit ratings negative outlook?
Yes, if it's to the last question first, I think there's a sort of broader industry sort of perspective of where the agencies are looking at the financial resilience of the water sector. I mean, we as Anglian have been standard graded by Ofwat for some time, so I think that's Ofwat would hold us in reasonable regard. We're at 69% at the OpCo. Our intent as we go through AMP8 is to get to 65%, so we want to reduce that. At the MidCo, we're currently at 79. We want to get that down to 75%. The whole coast sits at 84%. So you know, we're live to those ratios. It's some of the agencies, as you say, take a view on both for individual companies and the sector as a whole. It plays to your earlier question. That's something we look to address over the next 5 years.
I think from my estimation, about a quarter of customers' bills are currently used to service your debt levels. Do you think that's the right place for customers when we look at our bills?
One thing I should have probably said to the Chair, I've got a full pack of detailed information, much of which is sort of historical, so I'll try and do justice to many of these questions.
Broadly, my calculation is broadly about 24% of customers.
Yeah, I don't recognise that number. The Ofwat set a threshold of 18%, and we're at 13 in this AMP. I think Ofwat set the threshold for 26% in AMP8, recognising there's greater investment required, so that's for the future. So, but again, that'll be, it's one of those measures that we're live to.
Good. Can I ask you about another calculation? So it looks like here, from when I looked at in 2023, Anglian paid shareholders £1,618 in dividends for every hour of sewage dumped into the environment. Do you think that was reasonable?
Our shareholders have had one dividend of about £90 million in the last 5 years. And the only other return they get on their investment is through the cost of equity that is set by Ofwat. Clearly, our performance and the ODI regime measures a whole series of measures, pollutions being one of those. At the time, that's the only time that any performance has been such in the company when a dividend has been justified, and we haven't taken one. The board haven't taken, and the shareholders haven't taken a dividend since, and they won't take another dividend this side of the end of AMP7 now. So. At the time, I can't comment on why the company did. I mean, there's a regime which drives that. There's no doubt that the size of that dividend would have been impacted by the pollution performance in the way you describe, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we're really interested. We've seen this in a number of companies that there seems to be, when we talk about the basket of measures which lead to either executive pay or dividends, they often seem to, and then we talk about pollution, the two things seem completely disjointed. So it's about understanding the corporate, that whether actually is the actual measure of pollution a direct factor in your dividend policy?
Absolutely, both at executive level, at the company level, and also in terms of what that would mean to how we drive outperformance into the business that would result in shareholder dividends. Pollutions is one of those core factors, and if our pollution's performance, as to your question, isn't where it needs to be, then that will absolutely impact any dividends. And that's why, frankly, in the subsequent 2 years, our pollution's performance, which I'm sure we come to, has not been good enough by some distance. It's a big focus of mine since I've arrived. And that's absolutely had an impact on any likely dividends for shareholders.
So there's a number of things in it. So Ofwat have said in 23-24 you were the third worst performer. The EA in its latest report says that you're one of 4 companies responsible for 90% of the serious pollution. My figures here say that over the last 15 years, Anglian's been found guilty of 74 different breaches of environment law and now paid fines totalling almost £4 million. How bad does your performance have to be before a water company's licence is revoked or challenged by Ofwat?
Well, let me deal with your first point. I recognise that our pollution performance is unacceptable. It's the thing that's defining the company. To the earlier question, I've been very impressed with what I've seen in the company thus far. And Anglian's very good at many things, but our pollution performance, for a range of reasons, is unacceptable. Our shareholders put an additional 100 million into the business just over a year ago to help address that. We're well through the investment that's make an impact. We've got huge provision for investment in our water recycling infrastructure in AMP8, but I think realistically that's going to take us probably 2 to 3 years of AMP8 to really start to make a difference. So some of the situations we find ourselves in terms of asset health, the amount of flow in our system, some of the other issues around groundwater. So we've got some serious challenge in our pollutions area. Your point around the EPA 2-star, we've been an EPA 2-star company, and I set a challenge for the organisation that we should be looking to get back to EPA 3-star through the middle of this AMP, and frankly, get back to where Anglian's been historically, which is to sort of be a 4-star company towards the end of the AMP. So this is a long game for us. We can't run at this problem quick enough, frankly. And we've sort of totally reset our approach to water recycling in the last couple of years. We brought a new director in as part of my leadership team. So it is the sort of single most thing that the organisation is focused on, alongside all those other things that we have to do.
Yeah, and I recognise there's been some change in corporate behaviour in your news. So, we often ask about executive pay and bonuses, and the particular case of your predecessor receiving, I think it was £300,000 bonus. Then the following year there was a decision where a bonus wasn't paid out. I'm interested, is that a bonus that extends across the executive team, or a policy that extends across the executive team, or just the CEO? And given the long-term nature of turning this round, how likely do you think it is in this next price review period, because of the environmental problems you're putting right, that you will go back to a policy of receiving a bonus?
Well, in terms of commenting on the past, I know my predecessor forego his bonus in his last year for exactly the reasons you say. We have an incentive regime for the executive team at Anglian. It's set against a whole series of measures: pollutions, safety, financial performance, leakage, customer service, as you'd expect, and any. Ultimately, the board and the Remco decide whether that's justified. They have discretion, so it's quite formulaic, but actually they have discretion that if any particular measure is unacceptable, they can frankly choose not to pay bonuses, and it's within their gift. And that's not affected me thus far because I've not been there long enough. But I think, to your point, the executive team would only expect to earn any incentive element of their remuneration if performance is acceptable, and that's the role of Remco.
And in terms of, I understand the difference between Remco and independent boards, but in terms of your belief and your level of comfort, what would be an acceptable level of pollution for you to receive a bonus payment?
I mean, that's a fascinating question, because arguably too many, any pollution is one pollution too many, isn't it? We will come from a world where we want to be at zero pollutions. I think the reality of what we're staring at Anglian is we are some way from getting there. And I think the board are going to have to take a decision around keeping people, incentivising people, motivating people, retaining the right talent in the organisation. We look at a whole series of factors, and I think the board are going to have to take a view on, is pollutions sufficiently important to nullify or otherwise any incentive? And I think that's it's a totally legitimate question, and it's a legitimate conversation around the board table at Anglian.
Do you have board level discussions? Just my final point. Do you have board level discussions around the level of public anger, around the way that pollution seems to be not dealt with, and this dissidence between corporate behaviour and the continued pollution and spills into rivers in my patch in Peterborough, but more widely for several members?
Absolutely we do. One of the things that I've done since I've arrived, I've sort of commissioned 3 pieces of work since I've arrived. One is around pollutions. I've brought an independent consultant in, because this is not sort of my technical background. I wanted to get under the skin of what's really going on with our work on pollutions. Are we making the right interventions? Is the money we're spending to get us there fast enough? Have we got the right management arrangements and technology in place? And it's been a really insightful piece of work. I'd happily actually share the summary of the work with the you chair for the committee, because it's a very useful piece of work. And actually, the consultant's going to present that piece of work to our board at the end of this month, actually. So, to your question, this is very much on the board's agenda. The board are very exercised about our pollution's performance and the impact it's having on customers and brand and reputation. So, to assure the committee, this is front and centre of sort of mine and the board's agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see you, Mark. I think we both met when we were both new into our jobs, and I'm conscious that there's 4 of my colleagues in the committee that all represent areas covered by Anglian Water. I want to just pick up on the point made by my colleague Andy. Your predecessor earned 1.3 million as a combined package of remuneration. I tried to find your basic package and your full remuneration package, but I can't find it online. Can you give us a breakdown of it, your salary, and what any future earnings for a bonus could look like under conditions where you would qualify for it?
Yeah, so you're right. My personal arrangements are not in the public domain yet. They'll go into the accounts, which will go into the public domain sometime later this year. My compensation package in the round is very consistent with my predecessor, and I know it's been benchmarked across industry, so I don't think in that regard I'm an outlier. My base pay is 720k. There's then an incentive element on top of that, which the earlier question is going to be around performance and the things that we talked about with Mr. Pakes. But I've not been a full year in the company yet, so frankly that's somewhat in the future, and for me not really a focus. My focus has been really getting.
Would you be in a situation where you would likely receive a bonus this financial year, even though you've started? I appreciate you haven't completed a full financial year. Well,
2 things. One is we've not got to the end of the year. That's not my decision. That's a decision for the board. I think, frankly, with the special measures bill, that's probably going to have another bearing on how executives are paid and remunerated in this industry. So I think there's a number of uncertainties there, which I've not overly got focused on because I've been really trying to get my arms around the day job, and it's something for the board in the future, frankly.
I appreciate we don't want to spend the entire session talking about bonuses, but I think this is a really important point, and there is a lack of consistency between each of the remuneration committees, naturally, between different organisations. But we've just heard from Wessex Water that unless 9 of the minimum standards of 12 are met, they wouldn't even be put forward. The executives wouldn't be put forward for consideration. And even then, if they met all 9, there's still no chance that they would qualify for bonus. And I appreciate you gave an answer earlier, but I wasn't entirely clear how your board consider the merits and the qualifications for getting a bonus.
Okay, and I'll try and do this justice in short time. We have an incentive regime for senior leaders in our business. It's set against a series of performance measures. Pollution will be one of them, but there's a series of others. Each of those carries some sort of weighting, so it's quite formulaic. This is sort of because there's lots of measures and indicators in our sector which roll this up into a percentage, which would then lead to an entitlement to that incentive part of people's compensation. However, the board retain the right to not honour that if they see fit, if for issues around customer perception, pollutions or whatever. So the board retain the discretion as to what they choose to give. But there's a performance regime that's not dissimilar to many of the other businesses. All companies will do it slightly different, but we have one that's very transparent, and again, we could share the detail of that with the committee if that's helpful.
If it's transparent, it'd be great to share the detail, otherwise it's not entirely transparent. Thank you. That's all for now, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. We'll move on then to questions around environmental performance, and Sarah Bull this time lead the questioning.
Thank you, Chair, and good to see you, Mark. Anglian Water is the largest water company in England and Wales by geographical area. But in that then context, you've had, and as Andrew has mentioned before, you've had to return 38.1 million to customers this year through lower bills due to falling behind on targets. The Anglian Water is the 3rd worst performer with 40.16 incidents per 10,000 kilometres of sewers. It's responsible for 11 serious pollution incidents. It has the most non-compliant treatment works in the whole sector at 13 and has been convicted of 105 environmental offences since the 1990s. And that also means a fine of £500,000 in January 2023 for the discharge of 6 million litres of sewage into the River Great Ouse in May 2017, which is in my constituency. Is it only understandable that customer satisfaction is decreasing?
Interestingly, our customer score is going up in the last 2 quarters, which in light of the facts you've just shared with me would seem counterintuitive. So actually, customers are getting more satisfied with our work. I I could relate to some of the specific stats because we've made some big improvements over the last 6 months. But I think if you stand back and take all of what you've said in the round, it just proves I've got a job to do. And, come back to the other question, the fundamentals of Anglia are very sound, but there is work to do to drive performance. And the point around sort of pollutions and some of the other issues you refer to are the things that are defining us at the moment. And that's why part of why I took the role is because there is a big investment in Anglian in the next 10, 15 years, and we've got a lot of work to do to invest in our asset base, increase our asset health, expand the capacity of our system. We've got reservoirs and pipelines to build, huge investment in our water recycling infrastructure. So it just points to the fact that, yes, performance has not been where it needs to be, and that needs to change, and it needs to improve, and that's part of what I've been setting about in the last 6-7 months.
But I think the Environment Agency, and as you said, that sounds very positive about the future, but the Environment Agency has expressed concerns that Anglian water cannot and will not ever change in terms of its pollution. And with the greatest respect, in my constituency, HS2 South Northamptonshire, has had a huge impact and it has scarred the constituency. And I think your involvement perhaps with that will strike fear into their hearts as to whether actually you will be able to deliver on the changes that you're promising. So what will you do to instill confidence that under your leadership we will actually see this change?
Well, on the point of the agency, we've got a very good relationship with the Environment Agency, and both locally and sort of what we call corporately, we are well aware that at an EPA 2-star company we've got work to do, and as I've already said, I think we can see a trajectory going into AMP8 where we would start to improve that position. In terms of sort of confidence, I mean, part of why I got this job, part of why I wanted this job was to bring some of my experience in infrastructure projects. We've learned to some extent actually in Anglian through the strategic pipeline project where for probably the first time in the company's history our work is very much in the public domain. Often a lot of work that water companies done is sort of behind the fence of our own facilities and customers don't necessarily see that work. And so us being much more diligent, much more engage with local stakeholders so people understand when we're going to be doing the work. With a huge amount of consultation, for example, going on at the moment around the 2 reservoirs that we have to build in the next 10, 15 years. So that's part of really what I hope to bring to the organisation. Anglian's historically had a good reputation around project delivery, but at a relatively modest scale. I mean, the conversations we're having internally is that we are moving really from being a water company to an infrastructure company. We've got much different challenges actually. And to your question, us really dialing up our engagement with local authorities, the agencies, the NGOs, our customers, so they understand why we're doing the work we're doing, when we're doing it. It will inevitably be disruptive to your experience of building a railway through your constituency. And again, that's the challenge. And I think there's huge opportunity for the region with all that investment, but we've got to tread carefully because our licence to operate as a business is only as good as the way we take our customers with us and those stakeholders that are impacted by our work. And I think my experience is if people feel like that's done to them rather than done with them, then that's when you start to sort of lose that reputational bank balance. So it's that's the job of the next few years.
What will you actually do in that regard? Because actually, as I said, with HS2, there is a particular village, Greatworth, in my constituency, who is both having road closures from HS2, but then also Anglian Water are coming in and closing at the same time, and they're not actually consulting. And so actually my village, particularly that village, are being locked in. So, because you talked about, we need to have that greater transparency, but what are you actually going to be putting in place, or have, because you've been enrolled for a few months now? Yeah,
we certainly need to work with local authorities. Organisations like Anglian or HS2 for that matter, we can't just go and close roads without getting local authority consultation. I think we've got to work as Anglian much better with the local authorities to make sure there's a coordinated approach to things like road traffic management and the sort of things that we'll need to do. We've done a lot of engagement around the region with landowners, particularly for the pipeline project. And I think there's been a lot of learning in the organisation as to what that means. I think I've done 3 regional events with different along the line of route of the Spa pipeline for that very reason, because we've realised that we need to be open. The project got off to a poor start due to sort of COVID and weather and other things. We've got a really solid plan for that programme going forward now, And again, we can be much more certain to people about when we're likely to be in their constituency, when we're likely to create that disruption. Because my experience is people can accept it if it's predictable. It's when it becomes unpredictable, it's where you really start to then sort of lose the battle.
And then just back onto pollution, it has been reported that actually there were thousands of pollution tests that were passed at sewage points but actually were never carried out. So do you have a transparency problem? Because it seems like with your quite opaque structure, but yet equally with some of these results, what's going on there?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. I don't recognise the transparency problem in that regard. I mean, I don't know how much if the committee have been sort of briefed on, I mean, again, an education for me on the sampling programme. So, and if the committee wants to come to our labs in Huntington, I would happily host you. In our labs, we take something like, we do 3.5 million tests a year. We take 275,000 samples a year. So every day, 750 samples are taken, and we run 10,000 tests a day on all of the water going into our supply system and all the effluent that would go back into the natural environment. And that is all regulated by the DWI or through the EA. So it's really, one of the sort of early observations for me coming in is what goes on behind the scenes to make sure that we provide safe drinking water into the system, and that actually we make sure that we test any effluent that goes back into the natural environment. So I don't recognise the statement around transparency there. All that is audited by the agencies, and again, we'd be happy to share some of that with the committee.
Yes, thank you. I think we've been given various bits of information on this at certain points. And for example, it has been reported that Anglian saw the highest rise in the hours of raw sewage pumped into rivers than any water company, because it was a 205% increase, and that was of 273,163 hours. And often it's common that people blame sort of wet weather, but actually 17% of those overflows were estimated using EA data still in development to have happened for reasons other than high rainfall. So I think what we're just wanting, there's a lot of information and you've got a lot of facts, and perhaps perhaps we should have more data sharing, but it's not a very positive picture from what we're seeing.
Well, I agree that our pollution's position is not a positive story. We've had some, again, before I arrived, a couple of very bad winters when it comes to rainfall, so unprecedented numbers, and certainly the investment programme for AMP8 and beyond is, in our consultation with customers, our customer feedback is they'd rather see us put much more resilience into our system to deal with hydraulic overloading, which is the sort of technical term for having too much flow in the system. I think the other issue that Anglian suffers is 28% of the land in Anglian is below sea level, so we're very prone to flooding. It's very flat. We don't have the benefit of gravity to move water or sewage around the network, so we have a huge amount of pumps. Many of those pumps are life expired. There is a real issue about asset health of our pumping system. And of course, the other issue with Anglian, we've seen a huge amount of contingency, a huge amount of growth. Cambridge, Peterborough, Milton Keynes, Colchester, Northampton, huge amount of development in and around the region. We're not a statutory consultee in development. Developers have a right to connect. We exercise our voice, we work closely with local authorities, but it's an issue for us in making sure that we continue to invest in our asset base to cope with the growth of the region. So a whole series of factors, both some of our own making and some of those external, are sort of playing into the sort of performance you refer to.
Just on this question, I'll come to you in a second, Jenny, on transparency. We have, and it's been reported in The Guardian, around outflow testing. Outflow stopped for just an hour or two. This comes back to the question about self-monitoring. The information we have is that in some cases, outflow stopped for just an hour or two. On one day in May 2021, a flow abruptly stopped just before a tester arrived. On a day in November 2022, a no flow was recorded, even though the works appeared to be close to capacity. An Anglian water spokesperson said there were legitimate reasons for the number of no-flow samples linked. Sounds as if you were just turning off the water and that was a way of avoiding the tests.
This is, Chair, this is the, sorry, just trying to find my note. This is the thing that was in the Observer?
The Guardian, yeah.
Yeah. Again, we can account for all of those issues. We've got 76,000 kilometres of sewers. We've got over 1,400 water treatment works. And they took a very narrow sample in a very particular geography.
I mean, are you able to give us a categorical assurance that you are not manipulating the output?
Absolutely. I mean, the independent sampling programme in the water sector is something to see up close. It's very impressive. It's regulated by both DWI and the EA. And if you want some assurance, we can confirm that in writing.
I mean, you said earlier you've got a good relationship with the Environment Agency. As a parliamentarian, that makes my antennae twitch. I would much rather hear companies complaining about the relationship with their regulators. Is it too cosy?
No. I wouldn't want to confuse a good relationship with it being too cosy. No, it's a very business-like relationship with the agency, both at chair, chief exec, but also on the ground with the regional team. At the end of the day, the agency and the water company in all parts of the country have actually got mutual interest in protecting the environment and doing the right thing by customers.
And then just July last year, ordered to pay £50,000 for failing to provide records to the Environment Agency without reasonable excuse 3 times between January 22 and January 23.
Yeah, so that was that court case that was playing out just long after I arrived. There were 3 cases around withholding information. Actually, 2 most serious we were not found guilty of at all. There was one that we were fined £25,000 for. Actually, it was a mistake on the part of the company. It wasn't a conscious withholding. It was an error, but nevertheless we accepted that and were fined £25,000. And I think we paid £25,000 in cost.
I mean, you understand why I ask you the questions at the start about company culture and transparency.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I mean, this doesn't look like a company that, at least in the past, has valued that transparency.
I can't comment on the past. I mean, I can give you an answer on what I've seen since I've been there. I don't see anything there that concerns me. The sampling regime, the transparency between the management team and the board. We're very open with our regulators. It's not something that I'm candidly unworried about. I understand it's an issue for this committee. I think it's something that
it's an issue for a lot of the customers and the members of the
public. And it's been a line of inquiry for many of these committee hearings. But we have a sort of 2 customer boards. Come back to my point. Our articles are enshrined about our purpose, our investment in the region. We've got a further. We have a quarterly customer session this week, and we have customers come and meet the organisation and see what we're doing. They challenge us on our performance. So I've not seen anything in my time in the organisation that points to some of your suggestions.
Okay, Jenny, you wanted to come back in?
Thank you. I just want to ask a few quick questions on testing and sampling. I know when we last met, we discussed citizen scientists and the testing that they conduct. You'll appreciate that Suffolk Coastal, we have a lot of bathing water, so we have the entire coastline, but also some really significant rivers, the River Blythe, the River Devon, which I know that you'll know well. And citizen scientists are frequently and regularly testing that water. When we last spoke, we discussed the idea of the work that you could do to support that more, and I wonder if that's something that you've looked at, and are you working actively with citizen scientists like, say, the Devon Climate Centre, but I'm sure more widely across the Anglian footprint as well?
Yeah, well, candidly, Jenny, I don't know is the answer to that question specifically. I know we talked about it. What the work would have been as sort of moved on. I'm not up to speed with the detail. Yeah. We've done a lot of work on bathing waters. I think the stat is something like 92% of the bathing waters in our region have either got good or excellent. So I think the company's moved a lot in that area. And certainly in it's the River Devon, I've got that right? Devon, thank you. Again, I think you're brief, but there's investment plans in AMP8 to do further work there as well. So, but if the specific question I'm working with that organisation, I can perhaps come back to your office on that one specifically.
Yeah, I'd be keen. I think the last time we spoke, I think there was appetite for Anglian Water to work alongside some of that citizen testing work that's going on, and I think there's so much work that they are doing, and there's so much stuff that you as an organisation could do to help them, be it financially, but more broadly just supporting their work, because I appreciate there's a lot of duplication in some of the testing that's going on. But my final question quickly on testing, if I may, quaternary disinfection around wastewater outlets near and around bathing water areas, is that something that you're considering in the same way that they do quaternary disinfection?
Right.
Which exists in Europe around used in wastewater recycling, and particularly in areas of bathing water, such as the Deben. Is that something that is quaternary testing, something that you are considering?
It's interesting. I've not heard that term
Right, okay.
in the time I've been here. So let me take that away and
Okay,
just come back to you on that. So.
Thank you.
Okay, well, this has excited a bit of interest. Andrew, Jean, if we can keep it tight, because I don't want to miss out.
Go first.
Yeah, I've got just a really quick one. When South West Water came, I asked about the Friends of Myler Creek who'd been trying to test, and South West Water were happy to work with them and enable testing and work with them together, and they've actually set up some meetings to do that. So considering what Jenny was just saying, would Anglian not be prepared to do the same?
Or
and help the people who are trying to test?
No, philosophically, absolutely we would. I just apologise, I don't have the detail, and I will pick this up with Jenny's office directly.
Thank you, that's all I wanted
Fine.
to check.
Andrew, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I had a couple of quick questions around specific things. One of them is something I'm really passionate about, which is protecting our water resources, and you know the region we live in. So roughly East Anglia is responsible for about 10% of the world's supply of chalk streams, all of which are environmentally damaged, and the operations of your company are a key determinant in whether we repair that or damage it further. You claim that you're going to stop this environmental damage by 2050. You say that through two main mechanisms of reducing leakages and reducing customer demand. Now, prior to your arrival, the record of the government has a record of the company has not been good on that. So actually, we've seen leakages increase, we've seen demand management not being met. How do you expect customers to believe that you will meet that 2050 target based on your past performance?
Well, a couple of things. I think it's actually three things. So we've got more metering of our customers on a percentage basis than any other water company. I think now over 1 million of our customers. We've got about 2.5 million households that we supply in Anglian. We're about halfway through fitting those households with smart meters. That has had an impact on per capita use on a daily basis. We see a difference with the customers who use smart meters, and we will complete that programme in AMP8. So within 5 years, all customers that we can or want a smart meter will have one. Our leakage performance is as good as any in the industry. We've spent, to your point, Andrew, historically, water resources has been the focus of investment in Anglian for that reason, because there's been a demand from growth, demand from agriculture. We've got the lowest rainfall in the country. And we've done something like 180 kilometres of mains repairs and remediation work in AMP7. That is 1,100 kilometres in AMP8. So a big programme to continue to sort of sustain and improve that leakage position in the next 5 years. I think the third thing, which is again comes back to sort of why I'm in this job, is we've got to complete these pipelines and build these two reservoirs. We've got lots of water in the north of the region. We're quite water starved in the south of the region. Huge demand in around places like Cambridge and Colchester. So bringing water down, building two new reservoirs, so we've got that resilient water supply for the region for the next generation and beyond, and to your 2050 date, is really the other sort of big play for Anglian in the next 10, 15 years.
You talked in some of the early answers to Jenny and others around the importance of collaboration, working together, consultation, some of the answers. Can I ask you about a particular example which my exceptional colleague, the Honourable Member for Waveney, has been raising with me, knowing my interest in the issue, which he says Kessington in Suffolk, in her constituency, has had a serious issue with sewage coming up people's drains and toilets, and this has been an ongoing issue for over a decade. Now, in 2016, Neighbourhood Plans at Anglian Water was aware of the issues and was working with the then MP and Council to resolve the issues. If you were resolving the issues in 2016, why nearly a decade later is sewage coming up out of people's toilets? And will you give a commitment as CEO to take a personal lead on working with the member for Waveney to make sure that in 10 years' time, a member of this committee doesn't have to ask your successor, or maybe you, exactly the same question?
Yeah, it comes back to some of the questions. Our pollution's performance has got to improve significantly. I can't comment on a specific case. You've absolutely got my commitment to take that up with the team, and we not wait 10 years for that. Certainly we'll do that in short order. I don't know the specifics of the case in point, but leave that as a commitment on my part to follow up.
Brilliant. Glad to speak.
Just before we move on, a 2050 target, why is it going to take 25 years?
I'm not sure it will. I mean, if you think
targets of that length are virtually meaningless unless you've got some sort of route map and targets to meet along the road.
I agree, Chair. If you come back to my point, we'll have fully smart metered customer base by the end of the AMP. The first reservoir should be in service by the sort of mid to late 30s. Which the Fens Reservoir, the Lincolnshire Reservoirs 2 or 3 years later. So there's no reason why we can't outperform that date and provide a resilient water supply system in the region within the next 15 years.
We maybe pick this up in correspondence. If you're going to have a 2050 target, what are the staging posts in 2030, 35, 40?
And that's all in our water resources management plan, but we'll summarise that in a separate note. I think that would be helpful,
That would be helpful. We are wearing through the clock at least. We have some questions around asset health, high impact incidents and customer satisfaction. And Josh, you're going to lead us in this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So it follows on quite nicely actually from the questions that Andrew was just putting to you. Obviously the company made certain commitments around severe incidents in 2016. Some of the questions I've got for you relate to incidents that happened just last year. So Anglian was responsible for a number of severe sewer flooding incidents in Norfolk and in Cambridgeshire, and those isolated incidents actually reflect a bigger picture of internal sewer flooding rising over the last 4 years, despite Ofwat's target, which was for a reduction of 41% across the industry. So why are those rates rising and we're seeing more of these severe incidents, and how are you tackling that problem?
Yeah, and again, this is all part of the basket of our water recycling system being adequate. So just to bring some stats there, our instance for sewer flooding, 2.27 against the target of 1.44. So we're off, to your point, that target. Our expectation is by the time we get to the end of year 5, once we've agreed that with the agency, that will be back down to about somewhere between 1.3 and 1.6. But again, come back to the work I've commissioned externally. We've actually seen a slight tick up, an improvement in internal and external sewer flooding in the last few months, because we've had a bit of a concerted effort since I've arrived. But again, that plays to the investment programme we need to make in the next 5 years.
Okay, I think investment is welcome, and that will start to, as you said, resolve the issue. But I think it's also a broader point around how the company responds to these incidents when they occur. So in February of last year, residents in Hickling in Norfolk reported that untreated sewage was rising into toilets, into gardens and sinks. And Anglian stated in response to that they were confident that the sewerage systems were working as they should. So do you stand by that assessment?
Well, that wasn't it. That sounds totally unacceptable. I mean, so that is, it comes back to the point of as to why customers would be angry. So for that to be happening and for the company to suggest that it's all okay just doesn't wash, frankly, excuse the pun. So again, it plays to the point. This is an area, and certainly in my time in the company, I've seen our responsiveness, to come back to the culture question, of the frontline staff dealing with this are very responsive, and I find it hard that the company would have taken that position in light of the situation you said, but it plays this wider issue. This pollution issue is the thing that is defining us as a company, and until we can really get to the point where we've turned this around, frankly, it will be the thing that sort of characterises Anglian Water. So be rest assured, it is absolutely my focus.
Absolutely, and I appreciate this was before your time, and I think the answers you've given to us today have been open, and you've been honest with us about the improvements that need to be made. So I think we really appreciate that. But just to go back to this incident in Hickling, it was only after a meeting that was organised by the former MP Duncan Baker with various stakeholders that Anglian actually committed to reviewing that incident. Appreciate you might not have the details to hand, but would you be able to update us at some point on whether that review's been carried out, and if so, what the findings were?
Absolutely. We'll pick that up, and I can write to the committee on that. So you've got, I'd be amazed if that's not closed down since. I mean, where the company's done, it's been, again, impressive sort of coming in relatively new. It's seen the company do work with customers around blockages. I think we've done a lot of sort of campaigns on customer behaviour. People's stuff still gets into our system. We ran a trial in an area in Northampton, actually, where in the space of 19 days, we removed something like 10,000 wipes in 19 days. So the system is struggling to cope with additional demand growth. But so it's all part of a complex picture that we need to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we had one of the companies that was given evidence yesterday put the challenge to us around wet wipes, and I completely appreciate that
legislation, like plastic bags at supermarkets. It's a similar thing, actually. Yeah.
It's a massive challenge.
And these things are sort of coded biodegradable, but the reality is they've got to sit in water for months for them to biodegrade. But it's too late when they're stuck in our sewer system, and it's all backing up into people's houses.
Yeah, okay. But just finally on the Hickling incident, could you also let us know, perhaps in writing after the session, what you've done to compensate those customers and make amends, essentially, to that village that went through a pretty horrific incident, which I'm sure you don't want to see.
Sounds exactly that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to move on, if I could, to water supply interruptions. Now, the Ofwat target is an average of 5 minutes, 23 seconds per customer. For Anglian to meet that, I understand it would be a 45% reduction on current performance. And for you to meet your sewer flooding target, you'd need a reduction of 24%. That's obviously a really tall order. So with all the investment you've told us you're going to be making, do you think you're going to be able to come close to meeting that in the next 5 years?
It would be slightly naive of me, especially as a slight newbie, to sort of predict the future and say it's going to be fine. But what I will say is, and I recognise your stats around the 45%, actually there were two very specific incidents, one at Ipswich and one at Stamford, which fundamentally affected our water supply aggregate score for the... Actually, if you look at all other incidents, the average is 13 seconds. So, if you sort of took those outlying incidents out of the equation, our interruption performance is very, very good. And certainly, again, when I've been out on site with the staff or in the water supply side, their constant focus, and we had an incident the weekend where, again, people were into the night. We were within sort of some of 40,000 properties were off supply for, and people are very aware that they're on the clock and they've got to get back into supply. So if we took those outlying incidents, so we've had some issues around sort of flooding and we had a couple of works that were inundated, the underlying trend is actually quite good. But it just again proves the point that we need to make sure the system's resilient for the future. And that sort of asset health, asset resilience issue, I think is a much broader issue for not just Anglian, I think for the sector.
Yeah, just digging into perhaps the reasons behind some of that, and apologies for the pun from me there. We've heard that replacement rates for assets across the sector should be around 0.8 to 1% to reflect an average lifespan of 100 to 125 years. It seems that rate isn't really being met anywhere across the industry, and the final determination from this price review only commits companies to 0.4%. We've seen in recent years that's been going up, but clearly it's not where it needs to be. So regarding that, Anglian's been underspending its allowances for enhancement work for a number of years. So how quickly are you replacing your assets? And does that explain some of these incidents that you said are kind of putting your figures out?
I'll try and be quick, Chair, if I may, because I'm conscious of the time. I think that there are some specific issues around underspend on enhancers, whereas actually we've driven some efficiency in water recycling, particularly around our phosphorus schemes, but the underspend on enhancements meant that we could meet the requirements and actually we recycled that money into our base costs. It was interesting, the earlier point I heard around, there was a reference to the railways. We have three buckets of money: our core maintenance, our enhancements, and then there's a layer in between called capital maintenance, which effectively is, in the world that I come from, that's the renewals. That's where you spend money renewing your assets. Having gone to site, as an engineer, our assets are tired and life expired, and to your 0.4%, there is no way near enough money in the system, and this is clearly a legacy of many AMPs that's preceded us, which we know has kept bills low, so I'm not going to get drawn on that, but the reality is we are staring into a 20-25-year programme of asset replacement in the water sector if we want resilient water infrastructure in this country. It's a fact, you can see it, and that percentage, the manufacturing industry, we provide 1.2 billion litres of a food-grade product to 7 million people every day. Every day, 1.2 billion litres every day, and we're renewing assets at a 0.4% rate. The manufacturing industry does it at 2%. So we as an industry have got some work to do here to start to recognise that we've got ageing assets that need systematically replacing over the next 20 years or more. So I agree absolutely with the point.
Okay. Well, hopefully in 5 years' time it'll be a rosier picture, and whoever's on this committee can, have a better picture to paint. Just lastly, on customer satisfaction, you mentioned that it's been going up in the last couple of quarters, and I appreciate you're new to your role, but the long-term trend hasn't been particularly good for Anglian's customer satisfaction. You have been rising up the ranks in recent years, but only because the scores of other companies have been falling faster. So your score is fact.
We're not as bad as the others, is that what you're saying?
Well, that is the reality.
I'm not sure I take comfort from that, really. But
your score dropped from 83 in 2020-21 to 77.5 in 23-24. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, a range of reasons. I mean, we've touched on some. I think the pollution's performance has been a factor. The case that you referred to as a case in point. So we've got work to do. We've got work to do. Again, come back to the culture of the business. Our purpose is enshrined in our articles. We actually do care deeply for this, but we've got more work to do. And again, that's the job for the next months and years ahead, because our customers give us our licence, frankly. There's a sort of official licence question about the licence as a company, but actually it's the customers that you judge. And we've got work to do.
Okay. I think Jenny wanted to come on this point.
I think I'll leave it, actually, but thank you just for the time.
Just in terms of customer satisfaction, so in the region, we are holding you to a high level because of your background in infrastructure. We've got some critical infrastructure coming, the South Lincolnshire and the Fens Reservoir, which should be here already. And it is, one of the problems we've got is we've not invested in our infrastructure. So we're holding to you because of your professional background to deliver those projects. But one of the questions I had when asking some of my farming community and farmers around what their expectation is of customer satisfaction, consultation involvement, given these two huge projects is, sadly, one of the big words that comes back is arrogance about the way the consultation is done. There are particular fears around the delivery, the management of some of the pipe projects we already had coming through my patch and in the region, about the relationship between Anglian and its farmers. You're now about to undertake two of the biggest projects that the country will have seen, not just Anglian will have seen. How can you reassure me or address the fact that you've got customers who look after and tend our land and are part of the structure you'll be building in and seeking to work with, that they're not going to come back to me in 2 years' time and say arrogance is still the key word they take back when it comes to dealing with consultation?
Well, you've got my commitment, Andrew, and that's a word that sort of sits very uncomfortable with me, the idea of being arrogant. I was interested, I was out on a Fens Reservoir visit only a few weeks ago, and a local landowner was out jogging and stopped us, and he saw we had high vis on, and frankly, in real time took us to task. Because he owned some of the land and was making the point that the land agent had been and spoken to him, but he was waiting to hear what was going on, and it was a sobering moment for me personally to be on site with a local landowner who basically said, what's going on here? When am I going to find out when you're going to want to buy the land and when we're going to go to DCO and so forth? So, again, I think to my earlier point, the pipeline has been a really sobering learning sort of exercise for the company to realise that when you go into the public domain to build infrastructure, allow the HS2 question, so you're not behind the sort of privilege of your own fence line, you're actually out in the fields and the roads and the communities, then how transparent and professional and diligent we are in engaging with people to make sure they understand what's going on is the game. Because until you do that, we're going to go through probably an extra loop on consultation on the first reservoir for that very reason, before we bring it forward for DCO. And clearly there's a lot of good that can come from the reservoirs in the region, but getting there can be painful for local communities, local business owners, local landowners. So our job is to sort of strike that balance. Comes back to the point we need to be doing this with the local people, not something that's done to them, because that's when you then had that sense of arrogance, which it's not going to get us where we need to get to.
Brilliant, thank you.
Just out of interest, did he know that he'd lucked out and stopped the chief executive in the high vis?
I don't think he knew I was, actually. and you won't blame me for not volunteering that information.
Did he by the end?
But any member of Parliament who has ever taken a London taxi knows exactly where you are here.
Suffice to say, Chair, my team look quite awkward at the moment because they knew who I was. Yeah.
Right, okay, we will move on then, and we're joined today by Blake Stevenson, MP, guesting from the Environmental Audit Committee. And Blake, you're good to lead our questioning in relation to water security.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for coming along. So I represent Mid-Bedfordshire, which is on your sort of western edge of your territory, but I've also got an interest in the whole region as Vice Chair of the APPG on the East of England, APPG. As we've discussed today, the East of England is one of the driest in England, one of the driest areas in England. Droughts are common, but also so is flooding, actually. I know my area was hit quite heavily with flooding September, October last year. So I'm interested in talking a little bit about water resilience and flood management, if that's okay. We've talked about your efforts to reduce leakage, and I'd like to just sort of dig into that a little bit to start, if I may. Your progress on leakage has stalled since 2021-22, the data that I've seen. I'd like to know why that's the case and what you're doing about it.
Okay. I think the leakage, I mean, it's interesting. The same amount of water leaves our system today as it does at the privatisation, and we've got something like 25% more properties in the patch. So you know, over time, the leakage has massively improved, and it's as good as it's ever been actually now, notwithstanding you make reference to some sort of near-term changes. Yep. We've got to a point where we've probably made all of the, what I might call sort of tactical interventions we can make into our main system. And that's why I made the point earlier, we've got an 1,100 kilometre programme in AMP8 on leakage. I think there was a conscious decision to have a reduced amount of leakage intervention in AMP7. If you go back to AMP6 and 5, my understanding it was higher. So AMP7 has seen a dip. That really kicks up again now in AMP8. So I'd expect to see, and to think we've got something like 39,000 kilometres of water mains, and we're doing 1,100 kilometres in one AMP. So that's, again, a relatively small percentage to the earlier point, but that's ultimately going to make a difference. I think the other thing that we've seen huge benefit of is the impact of the smart metering program. Mm-hmm. So we can see through night time, because of the smart metering program, we can see where customers are losing water overnight, because actually they're using water when they're clearly not, and that's because it's on their side, and we can work with those customers to intervene and get that water usage and leakage dealt with. And then there's a whole series of things we're doing with technology to sort of improve resilience and monitoring of our system so we can find leakage. We've done a lot of work around pressure balancing, so we've got a sort of network in Anglian between the three main reservoirs, and the leakage detection team have sort of taken me through how we can manage pressure to make sure we reduce leakage in the system in a way that customers don't notice it, but actually we can make sure that we don't unduly sort of put more pressure into the system than necessary. And then I think the wider point around resilience of water supplies is the conversation with Andrew around the investment in the pipelines and the reservoirs, and ultimately giving the region, to your point around it's the dries, it's water starved, huge demand from agriculture, as well as this development in building and property, as well as all the industrial needs. We're going to need more water in this region in the next 20 years, and that's part of the big investment program.
Yeah. So thanks for walking us through what you are doing, but it's still the case that I think that Ofwat is concerned about Anglian Water not meeting its targets. Are they right to be concerned?
Well, and I'm concerned, but it's interesting. Our actual leakage number is one of the best in the industry, but the way the Ofwat measure works, they measure you against percentage improvement from where you start at the beginning of the AMP. And like on any sort of improvement, so we're at the point of the curve where our ability to improve is much harder because we're already outperforming most. That's why we've sort of made a point of investing a significant more investment in. I mean, the leakage target, we've got what I think there's an issue the way that works in the Ofwat model, but I don't want to sort of hide behind the model. The reality is the investment in the next 5 years is going to make a difference. But as a company, we're one of the frontier performers on leakage, and it's been an area where Anglian has historically invested for several AMPs, actually.
Okay. Yeah. On water supply, a spokesman has said that East Anglia would run out of water within the next 5 to 10 years without the new £500 million pipeline. I think in the answer to a previous question, I put quotations here, you said you've got a solid plan. Yeah. So how confident are you that £500 million pipeline is going to be delivered? and on time, so that people in East Anglia do not run out of water in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. I don't reckon I'm going to run out of water, but the other thing.
Well, there's plenty of water.
And it's in the wrong parts of the geography. So hence the pipeline bringing it from north to south. So it's the south part of the patch where we're struggling. The other thing, of course, is we do provide water to Cambridge Water, and we provide water to Affinity Water. So we have sort of a relationship where we bulk supply water through the three main reservoirs to the others. To your question, we've got a really solid programme on the pipeline. I think we've learned a lot around how we manage production in the winter period, so we effectively suspend work now and then go much sort of aggressively on the programme through the spring, summer, sort of early autumn months, because actually sort of digging trenches in these very wet winters, it's lie low and land, we've got the water tables high. Again, you've got to remember this is potable water. So this pipeline has to, the sort of hygiene around this pipeline is important for when it's installed. So we've got a forward plan that has that pipeline finished by 2028. And I think that's going to make a huge difference to places like Cambridge, Colchester and others. And I'm confident that we've seen, it's over half delivered. Over 200 kilometres of this pipeline is already in the ground. So it's, we're well on our way.
Have we seen the end of repeated delays?
I think so, yeah. I think so. I've actually got the Secretary of State on site tomorrow. He's coming to Reed, where we've built a big service reservoir near Bury St Edmunds, which is an important part of the new infrastructure.
I'm not sure the Secretary of State's going to dig the trench, though.
I'll show him anyway. We'll put him in a jacket and a hat, and he'll get to see it anyway. But he'll get a sense of the scale of what we're doing, actually.
And I think do you want to come in on this?
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Jenny, if you want to pick up.
Thank you. So Suffolk is one of the hardest hit in terms of the driest areas of the region. And I just wanted to raise something that I think may be of interest to other members, but I think I was keen to hear your answer on it. So Sizewell Seas in my constituency, they don't have enough water to build to do the build-up programme, and therefore we're having to build a separate desalination tank. Yeah, and that will only last for the duration of the construction, as you know, and then it will be decommissioned effectively. We also have, and I'm sure it's the same for many other MPs in our constituency, there are no new licences being brought on for new businesses because of the water concerns that we have, and Ofwat have about no lack of no incoming water, and those basically new licences are being suspended for 5 years, I believe, it might be longer. But it means that no new businesses are able to function in that area. Is desalination something that you're looking at in the short to medium term?
We have some money in our PR24 plans to look at 2 desal plants on the coast. We're also
on the coast. Where would that be?
I'm not going to guess the names. It's a big geography. I'm learning it. One's further north. There's one in sort of north of Suffolk. One's further up on the near the Humber. Yeah. But we are also talking to Julia and the team at Sizewell about the desal plant they're going to be, because I think there is an opportunity to stand back and look at that as a permanent asset for the region, alongside the 2 that we're going to investigate as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
You want to combine?
One final question, I'll try and make it quick, Chair. And this is about housing growth, which I think we've touched on during the course of today. So, Mid-Bedfordshire, like many other areas, has seen rapid housing growth over the past decades. Do you think the planning system is robust enough to ensure that water and sewage infrastructure is delivered at the same pace as housing? And I know you mentioned earlier that you're not a statutory consultee. If you were a statutory consultee, what difference do you think that would make? And regardless of all that, what actions are you taking to ensure that there is sufficient capacity in the network to cope with new developments? Particularly in my area, I've got a new town, Wixham's. Mm-hmm. It suffered heavily in the flooding because it was new infrastructure going into old. Where it meets, you get overflows. So keen to know what you think about the housing, the planning, but also what are you doing anyway when we have these new towns?
Yeah, I mean, there's growth provision in our has been in M7. There'll be sort of funding to deal with growth in the system in AMP8. We're actually in a conversation with a development in Norfolk at the moment where we're saying, look, actually, for this development to go ahead, notwithstanding we're not a statutory consultee, our system couldn't cope, and we're actually looking to accelerate some works at the local water recycling centre, because although we can probably get water to it, it's dealing with the waste is going to be the problem for us. I mean, if you take a step back and think about the government's wider growth agenda, I think that's why, frankly, this committee is looking at this subject, because it's going to be absolutely crucial for the country to grow and build the houses that the government are committed to make sure the right water infrastructure is there. And I think, to your point, that's as acute an issue as it is in east of England, in our patch, as it is anywhere, because of places like Bedford and the other sort of growth towns and the new towns that are springing up. So I think, again, the government is committed to look at the planning regime, the sort of broader planning environment. I think the water companies, as a statutory undertaker, how they play in that, and how we work with developers and local authorities to make sure that the capacity of the water infrastructure is adequate and that there's sufficient funding to deal with that. I think that's a real conundrum. I don't have an answer, but I agree with your sort of hypothesis that this is a really sort of crucial issue, that we need to sort of bring planning, growth and sort of water infrastructure together to move the country forward. And I say we can feel that acutely. And to the earlier question around the south of our patch, we are, if we're not careful, we as a water company are going to get in the way of growth, because we literally can't supply the water. To Jenny's point, there are businesses that are looking to get connected, and we just can't give them that. I think we had an issue with a big drinks manufacturer in Northampton. We got right to the point of them getting planning consent to build a factory, hundreds of jobs in construction, dozens of jobs in operations, and at the last minute someone said, well, what about the water? Because it was a manufacturing plant and we couldn't supply it. And they went and took that plant to another part of the country. So I think this is, a macroeconomic as well as a local issue, and we feel that the water company, I speak probably for all of us, that we've got an important voice to play in that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think that concludes, I'm looking around my colleagues, that concludes our questions for you today. To your point about the purpose of the investigation, you'll be aware that the Secretary of State has invited Sir John Cunliffe to come forward with proposals for reform. The purpose of our evidence-taking sessions has been very much to uncover the evidence that might inform Sir John's investigation, and it's been enormously helpful. So you are the final of the chief executives that we are intending to see at this point. Thames Water are not being seen, but they have other things in their mind at the moment. So we will issue a report in fairly early course, I would hope, subject to the agreement of the rest of the committee. And thereafter, once we have Sir John's conclusions, we will probably return to this, because it is an issue. The operation of this sector is of enormous macroeconomic importance and of wider public interest. So you are the final one. I think it's fair to say you are the only one who has appeared before a committee that included 5 areas, 5 representatives of areas within your catchment. So I appreciate the willingness to engage at that very granular level. We're grateful to you for taking the time. You will be hearing from us further if we can maybe correspond in those areas that we have identified. But thank you for attendance today. Thank you to colleagues for their participation. And I will close the session at that order.